Welcome back, everybody. This is GDS. I know it's been a while, and you might ask yourself, is this really GDS? What is that thing on your face? I really hope this is GDS because I'm wearing its underwear. When one of my longtime players in my campaign asked me for the best advice I have for them to run their own game, I sent them this 5-room dungeon guide. I've used the 5-room dungeon formula for years. It's kind of my go-to when I plan a session. Now, before you click off this video, keep in mind that the 5-room dungeon is not necessarily a dungeon. It's more about the formula and the structure of the session than it is about where it's actually occurring. So you don't have to run your session in your BDSM dungeon. Actually, most of my sessions I have not run in my BDSM dungeon. But it does actually mean that your actual session in-game does not have to be in a dungeon. Most of the times I've used this formula, it was not in a dungeon. But the reason we call it the 5-room dungeon as opposed to 5-room anything else is because dungeons have rooms, and dungeons naturally constrain where the characters are able to go. So I will be walking you through an example of a 5-room dungeon that I created. It's kind of a mishmash of different dungeons that I actually used in my campaigns, and it's been my go-to for one-shots for years. One thing to note is that Ben, the original author of the 5-room dungeon, makes his dungeons for Dungeons & Dragons. I'm not doing that, so I will not be assuming as much combat as Ben does, and that's okay. Just keep that in mind. So the first part of the 5-room dungeon design is not in the 5-room dungeon, so you could call it the 0th step if you want, and it's what I like to call the call to action. A good call to action has two components. It has an actionable verb, and it has a promise of reward. So let's break that down. An actionable verb is an unambiguous and dramatic instruction to the players. And I think the best way to understand this might be to look at a few examples. Take something like investigate the captain's office. Let's say that the captain is possibly a criminal, and the players are trying to investigate the office and look for any kind of suspicious letters or records that seem to be off that would incriminate the captain. Now, when we say investigate the office, it's kind of ambiguous what we're trying to do. It's not clear what investigate means, right? Investigate for what? The second problem about investigate is that it doesn't specify an actual action. Investigate can involve looking through drawers, it can involve deciphering letters, it can involve all sorts of things. So the way we can make bad verbs into good actionable verbs is by taking the verb that we have and asking, why are we doing this? So in this example, why are we investigating the captain's office? We're doing it because we're trying to incriminate the captain. So instead of saying investigate the captain's office, say incriminate the captain. Notice that this would be better than something like find evidence. The reason is that we find evidence in order to incriminate the captain. So it's one step backwards. The other thing is that when we say incriminate the captain, we tell the players what to do, but not how to do it. This is key for the sandbox playstyle. So let me summarize what I said so far, and I will do so by reading off of my notes. When we use actionable verbs, we accomplish two things. Number one, your players will know what they need to do. This is important. 2, by being more specific with our verbs, for example, incriminate instead of investigate, we make the quest more open-ended. We zoom out to focus not on how we want the players to do something, but what we want them to do, and we leave the how up to them. So that is the first part of the call to action, which is an actionable verb. The second part is just the promise of reward, which is extremely simple. You can say, for example, a noble approaches the players. There is always a noble in every adventure hook. And he asks them, or maybe she asks them, incriminate the captain, and I will give you 100 gold pieces. It is that simple. So the primary reason we want the call to action is so the players know about this adventure and want to interact with it, and know how to interact with it. But the second reason it's important, and I'm going to read off my notes a little bit, is that the 5-room dungeon is inherently linear. So it works best when both you and your players know exactly what the players are trying to accomplish. So when the players arrive at the dungeon, they're not going to try to look for, say, I don't know, something on top of the dungeon. Or they're not going to be like, this isn't it. Let's go check somewhere else. You're both going to be in line, so the content you prepped is going to be used. So after that blah blah, let's go into the actual 5-room dungeon design. The first part is the entrance. The entrance is the place where the dungeon officially starts. It also has a threshold. So there has to be some kind of reason, some kind of difficulty requirement that prohibits just anyone from entering the dungeon. And that's why we need heroes in the first place. This difficulty threshold is usually one of two things. It's either a puzzle or it's a guardian, which is some kind of creature that protects the entrance. The reason it's usually one of those two things is that guardians and puzzles are both passive. So they just stay there until somebody or the players come along. And they impose a difficulty threshold. Another thing to keep in mind is that guardians, even though they're creatures, don't have to be combat encounters. Think of the Sphinx, for example, might pose a riddle. So in my example of the 5-room dungeon, and I will include everything you need to run the dungeon in the nonsense below, the entrance is a few things. So there is a stone door, and on the door is slots for 5 prongs, right in the center. I might include a drawing to make this clear at this point. And there are 2 other things that we have. We have a pool of water, which the players might discover causes time to accelerate. So for example, if you throw things in, they start to decompose. Another thing I like to do with this pool is when players look into it, they see a reflection of not themselves, but their skeletons. Sometimes, if this is a one-shot, I just start them in front of the dungeon, right? And I describe what they have. What they have, you can do this, is a bronze egg, which is ticking every second. So the key of what the players need to do, if you haven't noticed this is a puzzle, is they need to put the egg in the time water, which will cause the clicks to accelerate and become a noise. The egg will open up and reveal 5 prongs. And it's pretty easy for players from that point on to realize they need to put the prongs in the door, and then the door opens up. But if you want some inspiration, another classic way to start a dungeon, which I did not steal from Matt Colville at all, is the players open some kind of stone door. It could be using whatever. It could be some kind of spell that they recite. It can be a key. It doesn't matter. And behind them is a horde of some kind of enemies that are chasing them. And immediately, the first thing the players need to do is get away from the people chasing them, get through the door, and find a way to disable it. I think that's a fun and dramatic way to start an adventure. And I've done that multiple times. And by the way, one of the reasons you want to do something like that, especially in a one-shot, is because I like to be done with one-shots within 3 hours. There is no time to meet at a tavern and figure out what we need to do. It's okay to just tell your players where they are, what they have, and what they need to do. So that's number 1 in the 5-room dungeon, the entrance. The second part is a challenge. So this is some kind of just a standard challenge. It could be anything. It could be a difficult social encounter. It could be a combat encounter. It can be a puzzle. Anything. The idea is to use up some of your players' resources and subject them to a challenge. In my dungeon, what I use is snakes on the ground, and the players can use a torch, Indiana Jones style, to go through the snakes. Classic, and it works fine. So that was the second part of the 5-room dungeon. The third part, or the third room, is some kind of trick or setback. It's going to be something that directs the player's attention away from where it actually needs to be. So I'll give you an example. In my dungeon, what I do is there is a collapsed place in the room. And the players will obviously try to go through the collapsed area because the rest of the dungeon is locked behind a puzzle that they might not see because all their attention is on the collapsed area, which seems to be the next course of action. When they get through the rubble, which they usually do using all sorts of methods, inside there is a trapped chest with no real reward in it. And there is also something I like, which I invented, is a wardrobe where the edges are sealed with wax. And the reason they're sealed with wax is because inside is an enemy called the Boogeyman. And what the Boogeyman does is it can travel through darkness, which is why you want to seal the wardrobe. And if the players are not holding a torch when they open the wardrobe, which usually they do because they are curious, it will go into the darkness in the cavities of their brain and basically take over them over time. It's not going to mess up this adventure, but what I like about this trick or setback is that it is dramatic because players don't know what the hell it is or what it does. It's mysterious, and it doesn't slow the adventure down. The consequences of this will be felt later on in the campaign, or if it's a one-shot, never. But that's okay. The idea behind the trick or setback is one, a dramatic tension, right? You give the tension of, can the players do this? Or, we have just lost precious time and precious resources. Will we be able to fill in the blank? Now that we've spent our resources, will we be able to defeat the final boss of this dungeon? Etc. The fourth part of our 5-room dungeon, which in my case is going to be beyond a sliding statue puzzle thing, is the climax / big battle / big conflict. The idea here is that this is what the rest of the dungeon has been building up to. So in your previous parts, if you can foreshadow whatever is here, it will feel more earned. For example, in my case, I use a Medusa because I love the Medusa. It's a great enemy, it's very dangerous, and especially in one-shots, you don't care if your character just turned into stone. Especially not when we're at the end of the adventure. So if your character dies or gets turned into stone, it will only be, 20 minutes. So what I do in the previous parts of the dungeon is, as you remember, I have snakes in the second room. Other stuff we can have is snake symbolisms on the wall and stuff like that. So that's the fourth part. The fifth part is where you actually reward your players. So they've made it to the end. Remember that there is the inherent reward in the quest that you gave them in the beginning, in the call to action. You might also give additional reward at the end of the dungeon. It could be gold. It could be, I love giving magical artifacts to players. But something else you can put in the fifth room of the dungeon is some kind of revelation or plot twist. That's always fun and dramatic. For example, it could turn out that the Medusa was not always a Medusa, but was cursed to become a Medusa because of some kind of jealous god. But that's just an idea. It's just a way that you can finish the quest, and it's going to be the flavor that is in the player's mouth when they leave the one-shot or the quest. It could be, this was epic, this was amazing, we got some bomb rewards, or it could be, that was so cool, but damn, at the end, that was, I don't know how I feel about that. So that was the 5 rooms. There is one more thing I like to add at the end, which I guess you could call the 6th room, but players usually don't get to it. And the 6th room is what I like to call the contingency plan. It's the, what happens if my players somehow just blaze through the content of the dungeon, and I'm at the end and it's only been 1.5 hours. One of the things you could do is just say, that was great, you guys did really well, good job, that's the end of the session. You can call the end of the session early. And if you came there just for the session, that's okay. And if not, you can hang around and play some board games. There is nothing wrong with calling an end to the session early. But the contingency plan exists in case you don't want to do that. So a classic thing you could do, and that I have, is the Medusa, as she's losing the battle, she switches on a lever and goes down a secret path, which the players chase her down, and in the way there are traps that she set up, and some undead that she can release on them, etc. It's just extra content that is hidden, and will remain hidden in probably 95% of your sessions, but that you can spring in case you need it. So that is the end of the 5-room dungeon. To summarize what we have the call to action, we have the entrance, we have the challenge, we have the trick / setback, we have the climax, we have the reward / plot twist, and we have the contingency plan. Those were 7 items. I can't count that high. But there is a person who can count that high, and that's the original person who made the ultimate guide in the 5-room dungeon. I don't know who originated the idea, but Ben at least has on his website a free PDF with many 5-room dungeons. Now, something else which I think is an excellent resource for especially challenges in the middle of the dungeon, so that would be something like step 2, or the setback, which is step 3, is something from 3.5 edition, and it's called the Book of Challenges. It is D&D, but the stuff there is so good. Even if you take it and you cut half of it out and only use one half of an encounter and add the rest in, that stuff is really good. I'm gonna leave a free link in the nonsense below. You can download it as a PDF, and you should really check it out. I think it's best to steal ideas from the Book of Challenges and from Ben's Ultimate Guide to 5-room dungeons. But I think ultimately making your own and kind of fitting stolen ideas into there is better. I can't really explain why, I just like it more. Maybe it's because that way you are more familiar with the adventure. But I also like it because I get to put my own twists into it and my own ideas, which, you know, as a narcissist GM, I love. So the reason ultimately I'm recommending the 5-room dungeon, and the reason I think it works so well, is because it is 3 hours worth of content, which is great. It is a classic dramatic structure. Notice that through the structure of the 5-room dungeon, there is a call to action, blah, blah, blah. There's a climax, there is a reward / plot twist. This is classic hero's journey stuff. This is used in movies, books, storytelling, and there is no reason that it won't work in your games. It is a hero's journey in disguise. And the third great thing about the 5-room dungeons is because it is a self-contained 3 hours, it is really versatile. You can drop it in anywhere in your game, basically. I mean, it has to make some kind of sense, but you get what I mean. Now, there are some potential challenges with a 5-room dungeon. One of them is the question of, is this railroading? Because you're just planning a room by room by room. Now, this doesn't work for all sessions, and there are different types of sessions. I think this mainly depends on the number of things you think the players might possibly want to do. So if in your next session you just defeated some kind of big boss, and it's going to be open-ended, probably not the best idea to use a 5-room dungeon, because your players are going to want to stray away from it. And when they do that, you're going to be like, I haven't prepped any of this other stuff. But if you think about it, most sessions, I think, if you're doing your job right, are not open-ended. You and your players are in accord regarding what the players want to accomplish, because you have good verbs. And if you're not, you can just ask. Just ask the players, what do you guys want to do next session? Now, that will not always make things not open-ended, but it does mean that you can plan only what you need for the next session. Somebody should make a video about that. I think it's going to be here or here. It's been too long. It's in one of those places. The other possible problem with a 5-room dungeon is that when we reuse that kind of structure, it can start to feel the same. So I think it's a good idea to not overuse it. You can vary your sessions a bit, especially having more open-ended sessions between 5-room dungeons. But I find that most sessions, whether you plan for it or not, follow that kind of structure organically. There is a reason that the hero's journey has existed for so long. So that's the end of the video on 5-room dungeons. I think they're very useful. And I would say, if you take nothing away from this video other than these things, take away the free PDF on 5-room dungeons, and take away the free PDF from 3.5 edition of D&D called the Book of Challenges. We went over the 5-room dungeon, why you should use it, certain challenges. I gave you an example for a 5-room dungeon, so you should go out there and use this for your next session. I think you might like it. And if you like this video, make sure to smash the like button an odd number of times. Let's do 5. If you are not subscribed, make sure to subscribe. So hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon. I hear that does something. I can't tell you how much this stuff helps me because I really don't know, but I hear it does. Another thing is I'm going to include a link to a Discord in the nonsense below. It's a Discord to discuss anything we discuss on this channel. So it could be world building, it could be planning your next session, it could be game design, etc. And that's it for this video. I'll see you later.